case you needed to be reminded, we are being recorded now, ready to discuss this in the long-term water augmentation committee again. And something's arriving. Okay, more people. Senator, I keep wanting to call you Senator Representative, if you'll forgive me for that. We wanted to rework the storage sites report as much as we could, and the commissioner and assistant director Chandler agreed that we would rework together the study. So today I think we have, is Jeff here?
Right here.
There you are, Jeff. Chuck, you could have told me that was Jeff.
I'm not sure I can see that far these days, yeah.
Jeff, do we turn the time over to you right now?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Jeff, except not ready with my little PowerPoint. I guess I can get started a little bit. So I'm just going to give an overview of that report and some of the background and what was done inside of it. I'm going to give a caveat that this was done before my time as chief hydrologist, so others in the department did that that are not here, so I'm speaking for them and presenting on this report. So to start, so just a little background. Senate Bill 1399 directed the State Land Commissioner and DWR's director to prepare a report that identified potential water storage sites on state trust lands. A couple of quotes out of the Senate bill language, that this investigation was to be preliminary, to identify acceptable sites to construct new water storage facilities on state trust land, and then to narrow it down to the 6 most potentially acceptable sites. The sites can be either under surface or underground, as defined in the Arizona 5 statutes. So in general, the process went like this. DWR did a general identification of sites and looking throughout the entire state. I'll get into the methodology that was used next, but just in general, that led to the identification of 21 surface sites and 331 underground storage sites. Once DWR prepared these initial sites, I guess we step back, there is one person here who was involved in that, but no longer works for the department, Doug Dunham. So just point that out real quick. So after ADWR identified the preliminary sites, State Land took over and prioritized the sites and whittled them down to the 6 sites as identified in the Senate bill. Then those were 4 above ground sites behind the dam and 2 that were underground storage sites. Going forward, I'm only going to really talk about the underground storage components, not going to talk about the surface water sites. No, yep.
More with it.
Popular meeting today.
Here's the seat up here.
We'll park this one here.
Gotta be tight fit.
Snuggle bug. But for you, you want Europe?
My apologies. So here's the coffee. This is unusual. This room. No.
Should we get Jeff a little smaller?
Ready? Okay, so again, 4 above ground sites were identified by State Land, 2 underground sites. I'm going to focus on the underground sites on my continuation here. So for DWR's process in identifying underground storage sites, simple. There were 3 basic criteria The site had to be located on a stream or a water course, had to be on state trust land, and it had to overlie basin fill or stream deposits so that there could be infiltration. So the exercise that DWR conducted merged all of those three components and identified the 331 sites. As it states up there, we did not prioritize or give any priority to sites within AMAs or INAs. We did also have some elimination criteria to eliminate some isolated places and redundancy. Those are listed up there. Obviously, the proximity to potential sites where there's recovery and reuse already, multiplicity of potential sites on the same stream, sites along canals, and not near the Colorado River, and areas with a number of existing USF sites already in place.
So Jeff, can you maybe touch on why the exclusion criteria for near the Colorado River?
I can't, other than I believe that it will be that recharge water will just go into the river and then.
Right. So it was a leading question. The exclusion for proximity to the Colorado River is twofold. One is that as Jeff indicated, it's largely a very transmissive alluvial fill, and so the water could be temporarily stored but would eventually leak and return to the Colorado River. And then second is that any diversion, we have fully appropriated all the Colorado River water in Arizona, so to divert and store additional Colorado River water would require a new federal contract, particularly in the region next to the river where the United States has determined that surface and groundwater both are Colorado River resources. So it makes it really problematic, as my colleagues in Mojave County can tell us.
Thanks, Chuck.
But not you.
So I'm going to list and talk about what's in the report as it relates to the state lands prioritization, but that was not done by us, so I'm not going to be able to speak in depthly about these criteria. I don't know if there's anybody else that can, but essentially they eliminated sites in the adjudication watersheds, consider areas where water management overlays will protect the water that's stored, will directly benefit state trust lands, and such as INAs, AMAs, and basins where groundwater transportation is allowed by statute, hydrologic properties of the materials where the recharge would occur, depth of water, locations of existing recharge facilities, and preferred sites within AMAs and INAs.
Jeff, a question, was water quality not considered as part of that criteria?
Again, I can't speak to the state lands. It wasn't in DWR's initial preliminary evaluation. I can't speak to what state land did or didn't do, but it is not listed as such in the report.
Because obviously that issue has come up as far as recovering stored water and the quality of that stored water and whether it goes into the CP canal or somehow affects downstream users and their concerns about that. So that's something at some point in time that should be taken up.
Yeah, that might be, should be included in discussion for future work and identification of site. Okay.
Chairman.
Go ahead, jump in.
This is Pam Hughes, State Land Department. I also was not at the Land Department when this report was conducted, but I can look into it and see if one was considered. I don't believe it was, but I can double check and then report back to this committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot, Pam, but obviously I'm not involved in that side of things either. Again, after their analysis, 2 sites were identified, and the 2 sites were Cunningham Wash out in Butler Valley. They had a an estimated storage potential of greater than 20,000 acre feet. The second location was Whitewater Wash down in Douglas INA, and that when this was prepared, they did not have an estimate of storage capacity. And in a nutshell, that's the report. So, open to any questions, Mr. Chairman, or moving on the agenda.
Why don't we move on to item 2C, committee discussion of the reevaluation criteria. Representative Griffin, would we ask you to lead out here with your comments and concerns?
Well, this is the first I've seen the report, so,
Okay.
I think, I'd like to see additional sites. Okay, got the state. We're looking at the one in Macomb County at 20,000. We probably need to look at more locations that can help us in that kind of thing. It would help the whole state. We're limiting it to 2. If you need to amend the bill, we can do that.
Your initial comment is you just had the opportunity to see the report. What type of time frame do you think would be appropriate for you and the other members and interested people in this committee might need for us to take a look at the report, evaluate it, and come back together and ask some different questions or make some suggestions regarding other locations or other criteria?
30 days should be fine. Yeah.
We'll take that in mind. Any other questions or comments regarding? Yes.
He's new here.
He's new. Thank you. Doug Dudd on EPCOR Water. Having worked on the original project, there were over 300 initial sites that we identified for underground storage. There are actually many more of those. We kind of combined, so we could have identified 6 or 7 along one water course, but because they were so close to each other, we kind of said, call that one area. I might suggest that instead of just concentrating on the 2 that state land picked, maybe those 300 some odd might be the first brush that we could take a look at and see if that doesn't pick up a whole bunch more sites that are a lot more susceptible to positive returns for the company.
Well, Doug, wouldn't it also be helpful if we were able to review the criteria by which they made the decisions, so that if we wanted to criticize it or understand, it might be helpful to us? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was remiss in not, we have a map that shows the state and the 3 underground storage sites that were identified. You'll see that these orange spots spread out all over the state, although the majority of them are in the southern half of the state. This is the Butler Valley location and the Whitewater Draw area down here. Those are the 2 that were selected. There's obviously additional sites, and picking up on what Doug said, that we've already, these sites have met those very basic criteria that there's a water course of some level on state trust land, and there's alluvial material, so that's the very basic criteria that we could work from to refine further.
Excellent, go ahead.
No, that's all I have, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think following up on Representative Griffin's comments, 20,000 acre feet per year is not a huge amount of storage as we're looking at the water needs for the state. So the question is, rather than having a hard and fast ranking down to the 2 sites that we've ended up in the report, is to perhaps look at a targeted volume of storage as if we were going to try to achieve, let's say, a 50,000 per year storage or 100,000 acre foot per year storage, what would those sites look like? Obviously, some of them are less favorable because maybe they're not, their proximity or whatever the criteria would be to evaluate them weren't necessarily the best sites to look at. But if all we're going to achieve is 20,000 or thereabouts, and that's the extent of our work, then that's not really going to move that needle that far down the road. I'm just thinking it might be more of a target-driven assessment or selection rather than.
And our target might be?
No,
You have to go out there if you're going to.
Well, at least 100,000, I would say.
Numbers going around my head.
20,000 really doesn't move it much. I know we're only talking about state land here, not the study, but there's a lot of state land.
Yes.
I also was not involved in this, as I said earlier, but I have a question for those who were, does anyone know why it was state land and not just where do we need to put water regardless of, is it easier to put it on state land or?
That was the direction of the bill.
Okay.
That was the starting point.
Starting point, okay.
What, Chair?
Wait.
I actually think
Hi.
the volumetric is an interesting idea, but I think you would want to relate it to the problem you're trying to solve. 20,000 could be significant for some communities. And so I wouldn't want to go with a strict volumetric, but instead tie it to what is the related place that you're addressing the issue, if any.
Not a rebuttal position, Mr. Chair. Perhaps maybe not a fixed volume, but looking at the volumes that could be stored and looking at the different, I guess, attributes of each site that is examined to see what it would take to achieve certain levels of storage, more so perhaps than a hard and fast cap. 20,000 might be a very workable solution for some smaller rural areas, but in the concept, and I'm victim of the Pinal stakeholder issue as well, trying to find solutions there. And I can tell you 20,000 acre foot of additional source and water and storage would probably not represent a solution for Pinal. So that's why I'm thinking there needs to be a wider net and a bigger effort to try to identify larger volumes of storage.
And I really approach the idea of trying to connect up sites with the potential beneficiaries.
That's important as well as far as what we're looking at, both the total amount that could be augmented and the particular beneficiaries for it. Go ahead.
I was just gonna add, are we looking at the source water? How much source water is there with that to determine how much of a recharge facility in any area?
Mr. Dunham will pontificate.
Yeah, we did nothing to identify the source water, consider the legal availability, anything with that may impact existing surface water rights or claims, and none of that was taken into account. The other thing I would point out too is it is tending to be concentrated, sites identified in the central and southern part of the state, because we looked at the basin alluvial geologic structures. Taking the conservative approach, that's well-known, easily permittable type of storage that could happen with the science around that is pretty settled. We know we can store it in these basins, the water stays there, it's there for recovery. There's potential that we didn't really examine because of the unknown. Storage in the upper part of the state, in the Coconino Plateau. The geologic structure is different. It's not a basin, it's a large regional aquifer, deep, very deep. There's potential storage there, but it's just kind of beyond our normal permitting process at the moment, so we didn't jump into that. So that might be something else that could be examined as well.
Scott, let me go over here behind you. Do you have a comment?
It's one thing to store water and the amount, I think that's important, but what are you going to use that water that you store for? I think that needs to be part of the equation. Are you just going to put it in the hole and, so you can say, look, we stored 20,000 acre feet? I think how that water's going to be used, the beneficiaries, is very important also.
And a timeline for it.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. With you. Scott, I'll take you.
One, I think we're probably all aware of, but I've gotten 2 texts from people that are on the web, that, and they're not getting any sound, so I don't think we're surprised at that.
Dang, we're sorry to hear, oh,
I
can't
thought
hear.
that
They can't,
Yeah. The other question, though, I have is, and maybe I'm the only one that doesn't know this, but the genesis of this report seems to be this legislation, and what I don't know is much about this legislation. So, you know, there's a lot of reasons you would do recharge. Some of the things we talked about here, some of you know, I know Representative Griffin knows, that TNC works with Sierra Vista to do recharge down in Cochise County. Some to recharge the aquifer, but also to supplement river flows. So there's lots of reasons we would want to do this. I'm not sure that that's spelled out here. I guess I'm wondering if anybody can enlighten me what the original reason behind the legislation was, but what the goal is. If anybody knows, I do not.
There's 2 projects that we're doing in Cochise County, and examples of what can be done statewide
Right.
in order to accomplish it. So that was the original. Where else should we look at to duplicate some of the things that we're doing? And I think I'd be opposed to a number, because what was, you know, the county is a lot different than Cochise or Graham and Creeman County. So looking at possible usage, you know, agriculture, what have you, I hate to see a good project stop because it's not saving 100,000.
Well, and good point, and that kind of goes back to my thinking about the discussion we're having here, because it's, to me, not clear why we're looking at this. If we're looking at it for those reasons, I think then this is limiting in the sense that it doesn't look at things like recharge of effluent or stormwater or any number of different things and the best locations for that. I'm not suggesting it should, because I don't know what the genesis of this is, but there's a lot of reasons you would do recharge. There's a lot of different sources, and I think that I agree that a number would make sense if you knew what you were trying to do, but it's not clear to me that that's spelled out. If we're just looking for good locations that are tied to good sources, I think that there could be more in here. But I don't know that that's the goal necessarily.
And to that point, we're losing the rains that we're getting through evaporation. You know, we're saving at one particular point in time, it was, you know, we're saving 5% of the rain that we get because they go down hard surface roads and evaporate. So if we can save another 5%, that's a good goal.
And there's a lot of good state trust lands that are in good areas to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And next, go Stephanie.
So Bill states that it's to be a preliminary investigation, and it seems to be this report, the discussion that we're having is missing a significant amount of information to make it useful. I would think. I would agree that, I mean, this is the augmentation committee, and there are plenty of projects worthy of storing water, so I think it's, I guess my question is what would it take to actually create the report that would provide the useful information that we need and the amount of information
And the
that's missing?
criteria that we're going to include as part of this evaluation, I think that's important because there's a variety of criteria associated with recharge. And each planning area has its own unique attributes that we did not consider in this report. We looked at it more of a global scale. And so if we were to do that, I think you'd almost have to do it by planning area and criteria-based.
As our brethren at SAP have said, there's some work already been done.
Yep.
Can we be cousins instead?
Shared common ancestor.
Wait, can I ask what our resources are? When we started this process, we had a certain amount of funding, and we went through the process and got a contractor. And where are we at now with all of that?
We were funded for that particular study of the work that we did. There is no budget for the committee to go out and do other things. I suspect, however, that as we develop this idea a little bit more, we will be able to take something substantive to the director and look at funding. Hopefully, we have enough expertise in the room to be able to get some good idea of what it might take, what we're trying to do, develop the criteria, and have some viable options that could be presented for getting some money to do what we want to do. Go ahead, Jamie.
I have a question. As it seems it's going to move forward, and its genesis is this piece of legislation, and I understand it was a starting point that we were to look at Arizona state lands for the storage facilities. I think you raised a great point on the planning areas. Will the committee, if the committee moves forward, will it stay only looking at state land? Will it expand it out? I mean, I think Mojave County definitely has an interest in this type of aquifer infiltration of, I hate to say floodwaters, but that's essentially what it is.
Well, I have my answer to that question, but is there anybody who feels that we are constrained by 1399 for this committee to take action? I didn't think so. So, no, we're probably going to open this up. It's going to go beyond state lands.
Okay, thank you.
Did that cause you heartburn?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I want to just interject that, yeah, the Senate bill is a couple of paragraphs. It didn't have any direction, criteria, just told us to do a preliminary investigation and come up with 6 sites. So that's what was done. I agree with that. Why not open it up to all lands and all water sources? And nobody's talked about cost component either. That might be another criteria to incorporate, because it all costs money. So I'm just in support of broadening it up, but having the committee come up with criteria and whatever is going to be used, so that it's not left up to somebody else like us or a contractor to do it, to come up with their own criteria. The committee should tell them exactly what to be looked at, and that will make it easier and more effective, I believe.
The experience of the 2 departments in putting together this report is going to be helpful in developing the criteria for what this committee wants to do.
I won't speak for the director, but I believe that he would agree that we, DWR, I won't speak for land, but definitely provide resources to help the committee come up with criteria and do that.
And we would look at, of course, our other partners, sometimes cousins, to help in that as well because of the experience they have. Yes.
Mr. Chair, if I may, and you know, I'm new to the. It occurs to me, my experience working with the AMLA cities, you know, if they wanted to do a recharge project, you know, they were looking generally at, you know, what area was in proximity to their communities where they could store water. So, you know, it was a matter of if they had the funding, you know, they would look at an area that was somewhere close to a canal that they could access, or somewhere relatively near one of their communities, hopefully. They're, you know, in some cases, maybe they were storing water that is not terribly close proximity and doesn't have, you know, easy access for recovery, and they're struggling with that issue. So it occurs to me that, does it make sense for us to try to locate, you know, as many possible sites wherever they may lie within the state, or is it better to find a way to help communities that are looking for sites to store water that is close to them, that may have access to water to store, or, you know, may have runoff that they could capture legally to even start with? Are we kind of putting the cart before the horse? It's the best way to spend our resources. I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration. I mean, Jeff, you with your experience as a hydrologist, I mean, does having a menu of, okay, these sites might have hydrologic value as storage sites, is that going to provide useful information.
You need additional criteria overlaid with that because that's the physical component of where you can recharge, but the water source, the cost, regulatory requirements, if it's recovered, it has to be how it's recovered, how it's transported, what the water quality is, all those things need to be added to an evaluation. It could do it either you identify locations and then apply criteria to it, or you try to use criteria to identify locations. I'll just tell you, when you're doing it statewide, that's a very large area. So, you know, narrowing down the scope spatially might be a helpful way to go about it, but I'll stop there.
Mr. Chair, I think we should set our expectations of what any study would be able to do. I can't imagine it would be still anything more than preliminary. It's a screening tool. It's perhaps something that a water planning area, communities in those water planning areas could use perhaps to do further work on that, to develop hardened, real on-the-ground projects. But I think, it may be beyond the scope of what this committee can do, and that's, at the end of the day, I think it'd be wider in scope, but still a preliminary assessment of recharge sites within the state.
Yeah, and I agree with Bill. I think that the value that this committee can provide is identifying tools in the toolbox for communities to chart their own path to a more sustainable water supply in all of the planning areas, and using the resources of the Department of Water Resources and state land as an initial identification of where a community can start to look, I think would accelerate those communities' discussions of how they may want to proceed with enhancement of natural recharge or runoff capture, those types of tools. And far be it from this committee to be a decider on what tools to select to use.
I would agree with Chuck. I think that the study should be as encompassing as it can be as it relates to possible sites or solutions, because we're looking at it from today, but a well-done study could be a value 5 years from now or 30 years, but they don't have to recreate this exercise. They may not have an issue today, but in 25 years they may, we want to do some recharge, and they can, DWR can say, we had it. We didn't, this area didn't get picked 25 years ago, if that's, but it's still a balanced area. It will provide tools to communities that maybe look into the future to resolve some problems rather than just trying to solve something today. So I think it will have value the broader it's done. And then we can take it and say, narrow it down from that based on what solutions or timeframes we're trying to address as creating a solution where we need something in the next 10 years. That will narrow it down. We need something in the next 5 years. That will narrow it down. The discussion about beneficiaries and issues, 20,000 acre feet, Cochise County is huge. I mean, go look at anything. And that's a lot of water. Whenever, at some point in time, they end up with a 100-year water supply requirement, it's 2 million acre feet. It's a lot of water. It's not a lot of water for, Maricopa County or Phoenix-AMA or maybe even Canal, but the Cochise is a lot. And so I think that the study should, and I don't mean to expand it from 331 and whatever the other 21, probably some more, but but at least, drilling down into it really more.
So Scott, I think Scott had his hand up first.
Stephanie.
And then Stephanie again, and then
I think, at least, it's a reminder for those who haven't looked at it in a while, there is a recharge section in the report, and it does talk about a lot of these sources and potential locations. And I think what I'm hearing from Bass and Bill and Chuck is, and for those of you who've been on this council, I think that's what you're talking about is exactly what we've done here, you know. And so I think that whatever report that we're talking about would overlay with what we've already done and supplement. So in terms of the discussion we're having.
Stephanie.
I guess that my comment's just kind of in line with Scott's and Bruce's in the sense that it seems like between the report that we did and the bigger planning area report that DWR did a few years ago, it would seem like there would be something within those two reports that can cross over to say, these are the planning areas that are looking at this as we'd identified, you know, water supply is an issue, recharge storage is a possible solution. It seems like there should have been something in those that would have addressed that to start from.
Excellent. State land.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Are there any other urgent comments? I'm about to take some action.
Mr. over here.
Yes.
Just kind of build on what a lot of people talk about, and Carol's, and the needs of some of these smaller communities currently right now. Us at Land Advisors and Mark, we're representing the Diddler site. We're representing the sale of 250,000 acre-feet of stored groundwater. And what is hurt, and it's hypothetically, if it works, if you can move this water today, but the communities that really need it can't afford it. When we're looking at these sites, recovery needs to be at least somewhat feasible. Because the towns that need it today really can't afford it. Just to move the water, fees through the current system, CAP, are high, to pump water from the ground. You might have to clean it due to quality. It makes it really hard to actually recover it. So we can make these recharge places, but physically recover it and move it to a community that really needs it. It's really an economic challenge.
Thank you, Representative.
In the report, it identifies dam sites, and the original legislation didn't mention the word dam, so when you're looking at words that have real issues, we might want to remove the word dam.
Okay. Agreed. Here's what I think we're going to do, unless there's a strong objection. We're going to have a potential storage sites project criteria development committee.
A subcommittee of the subcommittee?
No, it's just a committee of ours.
Can you restate that?
Potential storage sites.
Okay.
Potential storage sites project criteria development committee. Doug, will you take that on as the chair?
Certainly.
Thank you. ADWR, State Land Department, SRP, CAP, Kyle Center, and anyone else who will hold up their hand and say they'd like to be on it. Scott. Stephanie, of course. Name. Okay. Bass, you're on. Great. Bill. Did you get the names?
I did not. I'd like for you to see after the meeting. I have your correct email as well.
She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to you.
Volunteer for the subcommittee.
Let's take a look at 6 weeks to work out the criteria. Doug, 6 weeks to work out the criteria. We'll try to schedule another name and another meeting in about 60 to 90 days, depending on what you can do.
Okay.
You want 60 days to work out the criteria, and we'll schedule another meeting in 90 days?
Yes.
Answer.
I was going to.
Sounds like a
In deference to DWR staff stress, well, like I said, we'll take it to the director, but we will participate. It sounds like it's going to be a group effort, so.
Would you say again exactly what this beach is you've now created?
Criteria development for a potential study. How about we go 90 days and then 120 days for our next meeting?
Oh.
And those are our deadline. If Mr. Cullum says we need 2 years, then he'll get it, you know.
I appreciate the generosity of the chair.
Well, it's a nice.
I'll take it up.
Wait a second. Is there any other discussion on this agenda item? If not, let's move to agenda item number 3, the follow-up of water options report. Ron, I think this is you. We may have passed out the list even.
Did you really? Mr. Chair, Ron Dover from NAMWA, and it's been a few months, I think, since we looked at that final report, and my NAMWA folks came up with a number of questions, and we kind of talked about them at we started at one of the Gwaicc meetings, but I don't think we had enough time to go through them, so we put them down in writing, and I think that they're being passed around right now. I don't know how you would like to handle this, Mr. Chair. Would you like you to kind of go through them one by one? Or?
We would like you to go through them as you deem appropriate and necessary.
All right. Well, I think we've got about 11 questions here that came from some of the cities and towns in the northern part of the state. And this was as a result of reviewing the report. We know the report's completed, but I think to start out, there was some interest in where the input came for the water augmentation options that were identified in the report. And was there any effort by the consultant to reach out to any of the major water providers that may not have been attending the meetings, or was it just the folks that were attending the meetings?
For those of us that remember attending the meetings, I kind of remember the meetings. We consulted mainly with those at the table, Ron. I think you recall that. Other major water providers, I'm not certain there were many, if any, other major water providers who were not participating.
Okay. If I could add, Chairman, I know the consultant did do a lot of research on existing documents that had been produced. I noticed that you mentioned a few here that they may have overlooked, but I know that they did an extensive amount of research on existing information throughout the state. Now, we have to have a consultant here to go through. Yeah, I know. And it's we're kind of after the fact right now, coming up with these, because the report's been completed by the consultant. And, we came up with these questions during the review. And I know that the consultant's still not on board to make any modifications to the report. So basically, all I can do is, if anybody's got the answers to these questions, I'm happy to take them back to the folks that I'm representing for NAMWA.
Well, they're good questions, and if they result in some things that we need to supplement the report on, then we'll be able to figure out a way to do that.
Okay. One of the next one has to do with the BMPs that were identified, and they were applicable to everyone when you go to page 9 in the report, except Lower Gila. And couldn't figure out why don't BMPs apply for Lower Gila.
If you want to meet in the basement afterwards, I'll explain it.
Does anybody know?
Oversight?
That doesn't get any better than what we do down here.
Okay. Anyway, obviously, the lower group that identified. There was no discussion of how the options might address assured and adequate water supplies. I don't know if there was a reason for that, or if that was one of the questions that came up from folks. Or if there was a thought that wasn't relevant to the report.
That was a conscious decision not to make that linkage.
Okay.
And in most part, it was, we could connect all the dots, or we could put out there the options and let those who were looking for a way to make it happen put their dots together themselves.
Okay, with regards to assured and adequate water supply, that's the dots you're referring to. Okay. And while the report addresses the groundwater transfers from the Harquahala and the Butler Valleys, some other projects such as the Big Chino to Prescott AMA, groundwater transfer exemption, there's no mention of that. And also there's no discussion of that 17,333 acre feet of NIA water that's been set aside for
Does anybody who participated remember why we...
Was there any discussion of those projects?
I don't recall the Prescott AMA and Big Chino leaves there.
What?
Valley?
McMullen Valley. A couple of significant projects in this part of the state that there has been a lot of money spent on over the past years, and nothing ever came of them because obviously they're sitting on the shelf right now for one reason or other, but still there was a lot of effort put into them, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. And that's the North Central Arizona Water Supply Study and the feasibility study that was completed by Reclamation for the Pie in the Sky pipeline. How there's not enough water to put in the pipe anyway, but irregardless, that was moving for a number of years, and hasn't been concluded yet. It's sitting on the shelf at Reclamation, pending what can happen in the adjudication or whatever. I know the tribes are still interested in it up there. It's a shame that there's been that much work done on it, and it's not even mentioned in the report.
Well, that almost sounds like a compilation type project. Sarah, what do you think of those type of things?
I'm very excited to hear them mentioned because I want to get back to NAMLA and make sure that some of these things get on our water blueprint.
But the intent of the report was not to identify resources, individual projects for individual planning areas, but to identify a range of tools, and just like we talked about with water storage. So things like irrigation efficiency, trying to recall without focusing on transfers. But there were a number of opportunities, local desal, there were a number of tools identified, and there are a number of basin studies that could raise the same question, but our intent was not to link a particular project outcome to a planning area. So that's one reason why that wasn't our intent.
I think we kept being reminded that we were trying to come up with options for each planning area, and we did kind of equivocate on this question of how specific we were going to
Right.
get. I don't think there's any, my sense is that had the committee looked at the Bureau of Rec studies that you just mentioned, probably the committee would have decided that they probably shouldn't go in the report. Because we eliminated, for example, from the basin study, a huge number of options and struggled over that in our discussion. So we decided that publishing a report from this committee or the Governor's Council that elevated these as realistic possibilities in the current climate could raise false hopes. So we would rather stay in the realm of what's doable now. And we had almost every meeting, I think we had 15 to 20 minutes of discussion of that.
Like we're having now.
That makes sense. What's doable now, because obviously some of these projects are
way, way off.
Way, way off.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, in addition, I think when the Navajo Hopi settlement was rejected, I think it kind of did collateral damage to that was the whole pipeline discussion. Pretty much anyway.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I could offer a suggestion, I think it would, we can talk to the consultant, but it may be a good idea to at least look at these studies and see if there's anything in there that we overlooked that would meet the criteria that we use.
You know, one of the things that stands out to me is this concept of shelving. We don't want our report shelved. How do we keep those things alive? Some of the things that we're talking about now doing for, as to regards to other reports, pretty much help keep it from being shelved. You have to get them back out when they are useful and make sure others know about them, the blueprints, things of that nature that we can get circulated. The access to the report, perhaps in a supplement to our initial report, pointing out what other information was not mentioned in the report or not brought forward in the report, or perhaps not studied enough in the report, we can get out to others. That's how we keep these things alive. And of course, the direction we're headed in now with storage sites, it would certainly be the opportunity to bring up much of this, but this particular point that Ron's making with regards to what has been done in other areas and other times, probably we're going to need to figure out how to address that so that the work that has been done is not shelved where people can't get to it.
Mr. Chair, just to make a point as far as the shelving goes, it wasn't shelved because of lack of interest on the participants' part. It was shelved because of lack of money. Because the federal dollars died up. Only 50% of the feasibility study, and when that dried up, little by little, the participants wandered off, and they just couldn't come up with the funding. It was way too expensive.
Well, all of the basin study options, I mean, that's, the reality is every single is the engineering for an augmentation is the easy part and the funding is the hard part.
Right.
So I think funding does need to be, I mean, we have to have that out there as a criteria for whether something makes it into a study or not. On the other hand, and to Wade's point, I have to pitch the Kyle Center's Water Blueprint Project because we are trying to put everything that doesn't fail the sort of last test on the blueprint that isn't a tiny solution for a limited group. And that is an option because we can put on the blueprint likely cost per acre foot, other information in order to keep these ideas alive and in the public arena for discussion.
In addition to losing interest, not enough money, we add bright, shiny objects. You know, the bright, shiny objects get the attention, and those are the ones we're talking about at the table today, not the ones we talked about yesterday. So those kind of things tend to come up, but this committee will end up taking upon itself the responsibility to make sure that options that have been considered that are viable do not become forgotten. We'll work on that, Ron. Good point.
All right. Moving on to on page 25, question came up. How does, and this is a quote from the report, reclaimed water recharge outside of an AMA can accrue credits in addition to enhancing the aquifer, providing benefits to water users? How does that work? And what good are credits to someone outside an AMA?
And so that, I don't remember this language specifically, and it probably could be more artfully expressed. I don't think anybody would argue that the credits, whatever they are, that are accrued outside of AMAs could be used the way they could be inside of active management areas. I think that what this was trying to capture, at least from my perspective, those entities that we work with in Sierra Vista and potentially in the Verde that are recharging outside of active management areas want to at least reserve the possibility that if there is a regulatory overlay at some point, that they get credit for the water that they recharge. And even if there isn't, credit in some other way. For example, maybe in the adjudication court, if they need to show and demonstrate a certain amount of water into the aquifer that benefits the river, any number of other things. So it isn't I don't believe it was intended to say that it's the same kind of credit that you would get inside an active management area, but we do want to at least reserve the possibility that they could get some credit of some kind, either now or in the future.
Primarily focusing on the future then.
That's correct.
And perhaps,
my memory.
yeah, no, that's right. And if I may, perhaps it would be more clear if, you know, replace credits with value or benefit.
Sure, absolutely.
Because that was the intent of the.
Incentivize.
Yeah.
We want to give them something.
I think the credits would probably cause the question to come up with some of my folks. Page 26, and I'm trying to refresh my memory here on some of this. The question was, how is this 3% value derived? The last sentence of the last paragraph. I'm looking for that paragraph right now. Nobody can remember it.
Page 26?
Yeah, 26, right there.
Yes. The volume of water to be recharged at any one location for stormwater is highly variable. If reclaimed water is used, the volume of water that can be stored is up to approximately 30% of the potable water supply of the community.
What's that based on? Do you know? Did they say?
Sound science.
Sound science. That's
All right,
sound science.
Wait, sound science. It's pretty close.
Based on delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interior use and
Water providers.
what, water's generated from.
Thank you, Wade. Good memory.
Come on, Ron, you were an engineer for a long
Do you
time.
think it's wrong?
No, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just wondering if there was, what the methodology was used, because it doesn't say in there.
Rule of thumb.
Rule of thumb?
And it's pretty fair.
Well, the qualifying language, Ron, is illustrative. Is up to approximately 30%.
Don't take it out of context.
All right. Let me move on to the next one. On page 35, we get to page 35 of this is page 35. Regarding 5.2, that's
Control space.
the question. Regarding 5.2, and 5.2 has to do with what?
Modify operations of the Roosevelt Dam to use.
Okay. What impact would this have on upstream or downstream senior waterway holders and or surface water appropriations? That's the modification to the dam.
If there was any, well, first of all, this is something that's being considered throughout the Western United States by projects, and so it's not anything. You know, there's another regulatory agency we'll have to deal with, Corps of Engineers, Water Manual, but any additional appropriations, we'd have to go through DWR, that entire process. Now, this is very preliminary. We have a variety of options that we're exploring. If we could store that water maybe a little bit longer behind the dam and release it on a slower basis. So at this point, it's very preliminary, sure. But we definitely follow the options process.
Okay, it's just a question that came up. And then on 5.3, I presume that's still on
Page 36. It's another SRP. It's the interconnect.
Oh, the interconnect. Yeah, would this cause any impact to upstream and downstream water right holders?
As currently envisioned, no, because we're going to be, it's either new conservation storage water, it may be exchanges with recovered CAP water, et cetera. Offer up to the committee that we produced a video that kind of goes through the variety of options that could be pursued through the SCIP, and so if you are happy to offer that video up, you can view that, and it may be on YouTube. Do you know?
Sure.
No, you kept it close hold.
Okay.
It's not on the SRP YouTube channel.
I think the next part of that was a Munderloh question. This proposal likely decrease spills at Granite Reef in wet years and reduce opportunities for flood capture and use in upstream watersheds.
I'm really not sure what he means, use in upstream watersheds, but at this point, I would say no.
Okay. Okay, page 42, must be talking about forest management, and the question comes up, are we including grass management? 10 times the area as forest in Arizona.
And I think that's a very good point. You're right, those areas need to be restored. I think the reason why we concentrated on the forested lands is because that's where the majority of the water resides. So you get the majority of your runoff primarily from those higher forested lands where you get your snowpack and the runoff associated with that. But they're exactly right. Those lands also have a restoration need. And so at this point, we didn't include that, but we do know that that's a challenge.
Okay. And then the last one is not really a question, it was a comment.
We got a comment back
May
there.
I say something on that? You know, on the woodlands and grass management, that we're talking about catching and storing water, but we were not talking about ways that in some of our forests, a healthy forest maybe has 100 trees per acre. A lot of our forests have 2,000 trees per acre. And so I always like to look at problems. What are we doing today that's going to get us where we want to be tomorrow? And most of the time we so concentrate on today, and we look at the problem of, well, we want a quick solution. But I've been involved with the forest restoration, which looks at watershed, habitat, and a lot of this, and SRP's been involved in that. To me, that's something that we can do today that's going to give benefit. Once we get it going, it'll give it benefit year after year after year. And yet, it seems like the agencies want to tackle something like that. I don't know whether they haven't drank the Kool-Aid or got the vision or what it is. But to me, yeah, let's store water, but what about managing the watersheds where they're more beneficial to all of us, not only today, but 100 years from now?
Wait, if I might, there is, and it's not going to satisfy you, don't think, but in the report we do talk about forest management, and we do recognize all of those issues that you mentioned. As a matter of fact, in addition, the plenary committee has also discussed the possibility, and Tom Pushatsky, to his credit, has raised it on more than one occasion, of potentially going into deeper on this issue. So it's out there. It's not been missed. It's just
But like most things, we discuss the heck out of it, and or we form another committee and to study it.
That might happen.
I can respond I guess I would liken it to watershed management is really what we're attempting to do. In regards to not doing anything, there is now an RFP out on the street for response.
We've pushed very hard for that.
And as you know, we've worked together to push hard on that. And so we're hoping that industry, working together with industry, we can accelerate those watershed management activities in those forests.
Right. The borough would do it.
Yeah.
Gary?
While we're on watershed management, I wanted to put the tamarind and saltpeter issue on the table. I know our state legislature has introduced or passed bills to make funding available for that. On the congressional side, we have a bill that's been introduced that we're pushing for in the next WRDA package to address saltpeter and for federal funding available. And, I know there's arguable water supply benefits, but in terms of flood, fire, habitat, and some, maybe it's not the 100,000 acre feet, but some water supply benefits. Just want to mention, the efforts at the state and the federal level in terms of tamarind.
Thank you. And we have an element of that in the report.
Mm-hmm.
because of Stephanie's good work.
Oh, you gonna bite off this last one, Ron?
You know, the last one's not a question, so I'm done going over the questions. It was a comment that was made by from one of the NAMWA folks having to do with 7.3. Apparently, they were taken back a little bit. That it appears that rural areas are singled out in the negative context in the second to last sentence. And I'm looking for that sentence right now.
It says they don't have many options.
They don't have many options? Is that what it says?
And I can address that sentence because it wasn't meant to be, put in there in terms of a negative way. It was actually, if I recall correctly, which I think I do, the intent of the sentence was to basically say you can't blanket AMA type regulation of Arizona when it comes to groundwater, because not all of Arizona water supplies. Structure of, with the SRB. Discussion was, a lot of discussion has been around how do we regulate groundwater in Arizona, and it was important to have in the report the recognition that rural Arizona does not have alternative water supplies that central Arizona or the river county. That was the intent of the language, but obviously it maybe didn't come across that way.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
I didn't.
To bring them forward.
Thank you.
I'll get back to my folks.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question on your fourth item, page 16. Could you clarify the 17,333 of NIA water set aside for rural Arizona?
You'd like me to clarify that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
There has been, I think we're going through 3 stages of reallocations of NIA water. And first stage, ADWR has already made a recommendation to reclamation. We'll be getting that water. I don't believe it's been finalized yet.
That's correct.
Because of the environmental process is holding it up or something like that. And in the second stage, there was 17,333 feet of water that was set aside for areas outside of the AMAs, the rural areas, if they would so choose to pursue applying for it. And I know that they have had some work done evaluating the cost and the potential use and the reliability of that water, because it's very expensive water. But right now, some of the other communities such as Flagstaff, Prescott Valley, and so forth are still looking at it to try and make a determination if they want to make an application. But they do have that option available to them. It has been set aside for rural areas.
Was that in the Arizona Water Settlements Act?
Yes, that's correct.
That's where it was set. Okay, thanks. That's really what I was looking for.
But they've got to be able to use the water, obviously.
And afford it.
Yep. Somebody.
I think there was a timeline.
And the reliability after the DCP has just gone down drastically, and they're looking at the cost and the reliability of the water, and it's going to be tough to justify. But it may be the last drop in the bucket for some of these rural areas.
Take that project off the shelf.
Yeah.
And further underscores the point that small volumes of water can be a big solution.
Yes. Well, 17,000 acre feet. Some of those communities would love to get their hands on 10,000 acre feet of water.
Sandy? Griffin? Did you have a comment? Okay. Let's go to item 3B. Going behind it was down there. Yes.
Just a quick comment on the second last item. I'm looking at Social County on a corner in just wanted to offer to improve any research that would result.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll get that in the minutes, but Sarah's taking it down pretty fast, too. Okay, let's go to item 3B. And this has to do with options and further development that is needed. There are three things that we thought of, might want to consider as a committee: weather modification, phreatophyte management, and forest management, which may be broadened to include grasslands management as well. What does the committee think about further work in those areas as far as long-term augmentation is considered? And frankly, if we decide to do it, or Chuckley, I don't care, but we will likely have to start committees in those areas if we think that that would be worthwhile, to kind of come back and give us some scope on what might be done as far as water augmentation through the Embers.
So, Mr.
Chairman, on weather modification, we're beginning a study in cooperation with the White Mountain Apache tribe on potential cloud seeding opportunities in the White Mountains. Once that's completed, we plan to work together with DWR and others. Once that's completed, we'd be happy to share those results. That analysis. It's more of a feasibility analysis in regard to weather modification in the White Mountains.
We have some wet slope stuff too.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I would offer the report from our weather modification experts at Central Arizona Project, who've been working with the upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, for more than a decade on the application and efficacy of cloud seeding for snowpack augmentation, just for the committee to have a better understanding of what the state of the science is to manage expectations.
When do you think your study might be done?
Probably next year, early next year. Maybe I need to look at the scope. And much of our study is based off of the results of the work that we're actually using as research institutes.
Yes.
To work together with.
How far away would you be being able to give us a presentation on that?
At the next...
In 2021, or?
The next meeting of this committee.
And Reclamation might have some information on that as well. It probably went into part of your stuff.
Yeah, so we relied on some of the work that was done by Reclamation in the early 2000s. And since then, Wyoming has conducted a 8 or 9 year study and experiment with the National Center for Atmospheric Research out of Boulder, Colorado, to do a rather sophisticated examination of how to identify snowpack augmentation targets, when to seed, how to seed, and how much increased snowpack you can expect. And that's what we would report on, as well as what the basin states are funding and doing currently.
Would the committee be comfortable if we went with an early report at our next meeting from CAP with a follow-up 6 to 8 months later from SRP and the White Mountain Apache? That'd be okay? I think that's an adequate way to handle that particular topic. Okay, how about phreatophytes? There's some things being done on phreatophyte management. Stephanie, you made comments a year ago on be careful with phreatophyte management.
Well, I just think that we don't have enough research available to us to either, in other words, we weren't able to include a significant contribution to the report on management of phreatophytes because we don't have the information available. And so I think there needs to be some kind of effort that's by the effort of the state or nonprofit or something to gain a little bit more information about how much water that that saves and which phreatophytes we should be focusing on, and how that can have an impact to certain areas of the state.
Where are we? Go ahead, Chuck.
There's a nonprofit, an NGO out of Grand Junction. It used to be called the Tamarisk Coalition, and now they're River's Edge West, I think.
I don't know what they're called now, but
their conference is the first week of February. Anyway, we have good contacts with them on some of their research because their effort has been to improve upper basin tributaries and main stem of the Colorado River through management of phreatophytes, in particular tamarisk. So we could explore, if the committee is interested in their work, which has been largely in the upper basin on tamarisk removal and phreatophyte management, they might be able to share some of their information, as well as the march of the tamarisk leaf beetle.
I think that there's been quite a bit of effort by them and some other folks to focus on tamarisk and river species. I think what we're lacking for Arizona is we have broad areas in Arizona within watersheds that have been taken over by mesquite and other phreatophytes. If we really want to get serious about managing the watershed and about increasing the water table, we have to take consideration of how much water each one of those straws is taking up, especially in areas where it's invasive. It wasn't there before. And I don't think that we have any research really on that. The only research I've ever seen is coming out of Texas, and it's for different species and not in the same context. So, and then also going back to the woodland question from earlier today, you know, it's the same situation for areas that have been basically taken over by juniper, and you have these monolithic landscapes of juniper. You're not having a lot of water infiltration. You know, how much is that impacting, especially again in rural areas? We have few options in rural areas to impact or augment supplies, and so I feel like that there is definitely reason for the state to focus on these types of efforts, because it's something that rural areas can do. It's something that they can focus on, but it's difficult to get the funding because there's no research to show that this is how much water we're going to save, and this is the benefit of the funding. So.
On that, with the bill that was passed in the last session for eradicating non-native species, you know, we were allocated $2 million for fiscal year 2020. It's run through the Department of Forest and Fire Management. They were able to award 11 recipients, you know, that applied for different projects around the state, and they will be keeping very, very deep records, and specifically asked, you know, for a lot of data, knowing that this would be really beneficial as hopefully these programs continue. We're looking at, you know, another $1 million in the next subsequent 9 years if future legislatures continue to fund the projects, and many members have expressed interest in the outcomes. They want to know if this is saving a substantial amount of water to increase those funding, because that's you know, savings. Also, I know Buckeye did a study, and I can't remember the miles of the stretch of the Gila. The report shows a potential recovery of 50,000 acre-feet, and it was, I want to say, 15 miles. It could be more or less. And then also Yuma has done a couple of projects, and they were just awarded one of the projects, again, from this new legislation. So, you know, we're going to be getting some, I think, some very good data and some good solid numbers, not only in the water recovery, but, you know, how much does it cost, how long does it take, you know, to clear out certain areas. So I'm excited to see that. I'm excited, you know, to be taking some baby steps in that direction.
Yes, Representative.
Yeah, I agree with Stephanie. You know, I know there was a study, and I'm not sure who it was, but I'll try to track it down for San Pedro, where over 50% of the water was used by Prioritization, and they were planting mesquite moss and such, so I think it's really something that we need to look at.
Is it the consensus of the committee that we should pursue Prioritization management as an augmentation opportunity for areas within the state? Hearing no, yes, Sarah, do you have an objection?
No, but I would refine that to say that it sounds like what we have is the gap. What studies are out there, what, and before we decide that we should pursue, that we definitely need to pursue, I mean, clearly, to some degree, it needs to be pursued as a water management technique, but if, for example, the data that was just described comes back and says it's $1 million an acre foot, that would be really relevant to whether the state should make a big commitment to pursuing it.
And there are negative impacts to Prioritization management as well.
Right. I mean, there's so much we need to learn. It's kind of like, I think, where weather modification is too. We just need to learn more about the potential before it becomes a real option.
Bill, did you have something?
I was just thinking, Mr. Chair, that sort of like the concept of not having something just sit on the shelf, the next 12 months or 18 months are really going to be more educating this group about the benefits of weather modification or anti control, grassland management, or whatever. At least on the education and data gap and informing the committee about what those studies and reports show, it could help shape the issue whether this should be something we should pursue as an augmentation.
Okay, you and Sarah tell us how we're going to shape this particular issue so that this committee can have a fair and appropriate look at it to determine whether or not it is an augmentation we should pursue. So tell us what your thoughts are here.
Well, Mr. Chair, I am certainly not somebody who's directly engaged in forest management or grasslands management or Prioritization removal, and I'm a water utility manager, so, but if we lack education and information, updates and reports on what's happening, sounds like we won't really have any data on what's going to happen this year until very early as probably next year, if we're lucky, and even then, you know, what's that going to look like? Is it going to show $1 million an acre foot savings? No, I think it's going to be less than that, but you know, what is the boundary of that? And I just think we need to have more information and data.
Sarah.
Chuck mentioned River's Edge West. I know a few people there, and I think even having someone like Ben Bloodsworth come in and talk about, just it would be great if we could get him to present kind of basics in terms of the water benefits and challenges of Prioritization management. I'm sure there are others. I know there are many studies out there, so simply identifying the data needs would be my first step, and identifying what work is out there that we would be looking at.
Just, if I may, to respond, Sarah, I generally agree, and out of respect for Stephanie and the representative's comments, I think that there are two separate but related issues. One is about the traditional focus on tamarisk in particular, and then the idea that the expanse or encroachment or the new mesquite encroachment, I'm not going to say infestation, is something that needs to be looked at and evaluated, because particularly in southeastern Arizona, that you all know much better than me, is that if we're trying to identify water storage sites and runoff enhancement, it will necessarily couple with where the mesquites have encroached as well. So there may be necessarily an overlap between those two concepts of finding new opportunities for mountain front recharge and those types of things, and figuring out how to address whether it makes it to the aquifer or grows new tamaris, or not tamaris, mesquite.
I think there is considerable research out there that would be very helpful to us to start with. And I guess I'm willing to take a stab at trying to, and I'm sure there are others in this room, important. But I think we should start with that, especially on the mesquite issue.
You need to figure out what's available,
Yeah.
or you can figure out what. Go ahead, Stephanie.
I think that would be great if the Kyle Center can search out some of that research. I know that the Carroll firm is having trouble finding that research, and so, you know, I'm coming from a place of anecdotal research. You know,
that's important. What you said at a couple meetings ago was really significant.
But unfortunately, you know, projects don't get funded and work doesn't get done on anecdotal research, at least not these days. So, so if the Kyle Center could come up with that information, that would be great. I'm not super optimistic that it's out there, which then I think would reinforce the needed effort for someone doing that research and getting that information so that we can move forward on it. So.
There's been actually fairly substantial by the USGS on pre-ratified application. I can
For
give
mesquite specifically?
Comparison process. So, you know, even if they don't offer you a direct answer, that'd be a great place to start. I know some people that have been involved in that. I'll forward you the name.
And I think that
Southeast Arizona, Arizona range management studies.
well, and I don't know that we want to just focus on evapotranspiration, though, because I know that information is out there because people know different evapotranspiration rates of plants, whether they're phreatophytes or not. But to expand upon that, it's really about it's about acreage. It's about the acre feet of consumption of an acre of mesquite, you know, or whatever. Yeah, erosion issues. You know, there's a lot of environmental issues that go along with that. But yeah, so I agree. Yeah, yep, good place to start.
Cheryl.
This is many, many, many years ago. I sat on state invasive species council that was done by the State Department of Ag and Game and Fish. So Sarah, there is a report out there somewhere that had a lot of information, but this is a limiter of money. And so what's in the current step?
I attended a conference on that very issue. So
okay. It was a huge report.
We'll try to,
it was a long report.
You might check with U of A, those folks down there, if you're still speaking to them. They have a degree in range management. I'm sure that phreatophytes are some.
They're still accredited.
I'll ask President Crow if that's a good idea.
Well, that's COB, January 31.
Okay. Too soon?
Forest management. Are we pretty much in the same place there? Except, no, where'd Bruce go? Bruce, you still there? Don't you folks have some pretty good studies on that?
You know, many others have done a lot of studies on. We haven't. We're collecting a lot of data now because, for a couple of reasons. One is, you know, following restoration, of course you're going to have an improved watershed. Of course you're going to have an improved ecosystem, and that's more important to us. Cleaner water, less poor quality runoff into our reservoirs, et cetera, sedimentation rates reduced. But following restoration, I know TNC has done some analysis on it and done some modeling. From our perspective, we're not sure where that water will end up. It'll end up somewhere within that watershed, whether it's enhancing the aquifer, whether it's enhancing spring development, but whether it turns into actual runoff itself, the system, still up for debate. So we're doing a lot of on-the-ground analysis. We're not at that point where we would say, yeah, it's going to create X amount of water.
Would you recommend for us a course of action for going forward on this?
Well, I would recommend if Scott would like, maybe TNC could give a presentation on some of the analysis that they have done, what they came up with some of their modeling.
Yeah, I think so. I'd have to ask Rob.
Yeah,
But
Rob.
we did provide a number of studies to Carrillo, and I think they're listed in some of the references, but if he'd be happy, well, I could talk him into being happy.
And then I would be happy to give an update on
Yeah.
some of the things that we're doing. So.
Absolutely.
Can we leave that in your hands then?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure that the other two will come first. Okay.
That's fine. That's fine.
The other two will come first.
We can maybe do a joint thing.
Yeah, we might get an update at our next meeting, but we're not going to do anything significant until a while passes on.
Understood. That's appreciated.
Undertaking a lot of work today. So we're looking at that. Let's go to 3E, report distribution discussion. How do we get this report that we have from the committee, how do we get that spread so that the shelf copies are less? We put it on the website. Is there any place else you can recommend that we might want to post it or put it so that we can get closer to it?
I'd ask the resource question again, but remind me, and I apologize if this has already been determined. At one point, I thought we were going to take this on the road in some form. Was that not part of the original engineering contract? I forget.
No.
That was not.
No.
That was never, they were just going to present to the plenary and that was, then they were done? Was that what we?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And Department of Water Resources did not have the resources to do that.
That's what, but there was a discussion at one point of, all right, I'm not losing it. All right, yeah.
Groups went to the different planning areas, they would present this report.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
But that's off the table. Yeah, okay.
Sarah?
The forthcoming Kyle Center Arizona Water Blueprint does have the, as much as we can, a huge amount of the report integrated. In fact, there's a special interactive layer. And we are hoping and have an expectation of taking the blueprint on the road. And we think the augmentation suggestions in the report will be the major discussion topic when we're planning on the spring to launch the blueprint, which if I haven't already collared you and told you about it, it's an interactive map on a user-friendly website of the state's water resources and very rich with data and lots of information that's policy-related information. So we think that's one good way. One of our hopes is to hold events all around the state with local experts to just use the blueprint to discuss a local water problem. And that's an example of where we can highlight the report. We also have linked to the report on the map. So it's an opportunity, one opportunity to get it up there.
There's an opportunity coming up for the Arizona Water Association. They're having their conference. There'll be a presentation on it there. Have the opportunity to discuss it. Don't know in what context it was released. Do we remember? Was it just noted that it was posted to the website and that was about it? Did we do any type of release to media?
No.
What's the feeling on doing a general release to the media?
Yeah, it was, I think it was out there, and it's well past the actual release date now, so it's a bit stale.
Yep.
But I think there was mention of it at least on social media, if I recall correctly. I'm not positive of that, but...
Certainly, We reported on it to the CAWCD board and noted the release of it to our board and on social media when the report was finalized.
Yep.
Sure, again, looking at what were the expectations of the purpose of the report to begin with, right? So I'm assuming part of that was the different planning areas, that the people in planning areas could use that as a tool, right, a resource. So whether it's, the planners within the different planning cities and towns, the counties, I mean, to me, those probably represent beneficiaries within the planning areas that would be looking at it as a tool. So how do you disseminate that to those folks? I don't know that it's just by posting it on PDR's website. I think probably a little more outreach needs to take place. That to happen. What the would be, or the forums for doing that. The Arizona Water Association probably is one, because there's a number of utilities that attend those. But utility managers aren't always necessarily the ones who are doing the planning. So the water resource managers and so forth in those areas. So I think finding a way to get it out to those different areas and looking at that as a tool would be helpful. I think it would be more in line with our mission for carrying the sport to begin with.
We need to make sure the associations that are potentially involved with this type of thing need to know about it so that they can have it for their members. That would be a good way. Ron?
Mr. Chair, Ron Dover from M1. I think that's one of the roles that the WAS play also, as far as getting it out to our folks, member cities and towns. I know in the northern part of the state we do after AMWA is solid, so.
Yes.
I was still with AMWA when the report was released, and AMWA definitely did publicize it heavily. So, and it was one of the blog posts that they featured, and it was out on social media at that time.
I think they got some newspaper.
Just a reminder, let's not get this thing shelved. Let's make sure that we continue to use it as a tool for which it was intended. I'm ready to go home. Anybody else want to stay? Okay, let's talk about what we're going to do together next. We're looking at probably 120 days. There's no magic in 4 months, but with the things that we're trying to get done, it's probably an adequate amount of time to get some of these things done and have an opportunity for some reports and updates that will be appropriate.
Session will be over, right, Senator?
Yeah, 80 days will be out.
Making note of it.
So let's set it for 160 days.
Yeah. So sometime in May.
May, first part of May. Let's look at the
Cinco de Mayo.
Margaritas.
Yeah.
Last year we
Ratified twist.
That works.
Is that the,
Tuesday. It's a Tuesday.
fine. Oh, that doesn't work. It sounds like the first Tuesday of the month.
It is.
It is.
It is. Is that important for you?
By statute, irrigation districts are required to meet on the first Tuesday of the month.
They need an attorney? Is that what I'm...
Well, Mohawk follows that pretty religiously.
So what about May 6th?
May 6th looks great to me.
Can we do the 4th, the Monday? May 4th.
May 4th is May 4th is a good date. I'm just wondering if Mondays are good.
In general, no, but.
Yeah, Star Wars Day. Culturally, no.
They're better than things like May 7th.
I've got MSCP.
Got MSCP. There's more than MSCP. You got a little board meeting that day too.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going over on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Well, I just drive over, so it does.
Well, you can't do Wednesday either.
Yeah, it's the 7th.
I drive over on Thursday. I don't need to fly over the night. Okay, how about Monday the 4th?
Star Wars Day.
Oh, good.
Did you get that on the phone? That's a special day for some of us.
May 12th or 13th.
Yes.
And I will try to book a larger conference room, and just so also, Zach, my co-worker got the overflow, got an overflow room going on, and I peeked in there, and there's the next conference room over, there's another 10 there. So,
Anyway.
and we'll work on the
How about Wednesday, May 13th?
Yeah, I won't be.
I thought it
I'm gonna be gone.
13?
I can, what happened to the 4th? Yeah.
Sunday.
The 4th worked.
May the 4th.
back to the 4th.
10 a.m.
Just he needs to be on the.
Somewhere in this building.
That's right. You're supposed to be
He's supposed to be
It will be the 4th.
Same time?
And same bat channel. Did not. But the 4th, they got that really good.
Okay.
We thank you all for attending. We hope that you'll all be back next time. Certainly the issues we talked about today are worthy of your return. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.